I sat in my pickup truck outside Fairchild Holdings, watching my wife deliver her victory speech through the live stream on my phone. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, parked like some stalker in my own company's lot, watching Lydia claim the throne I'd helped her build. "Today marks a new chapter for Fairchild Holdings," she announced to the packed auditorium, her voice carrying that practiced corporate smoothness she'd perfected over the years. "We're moving forward with fresh leadership and innovative strategies." Fresh leadership. That was rich. 3 hours ago, I'd been escorted out of the building by security, my access cards deactivated, my office cleared. The board had voted unanimously, or so they thought, to terminate my position as Chief Operating Officer. Margaret Lowell, the board chair, had delivered the news with all the warmth of a tax audit. "It's nothing personal, Dorian," she'd said, not bothering to look up from her legal pad. "The company needs to evolve." Lydia had sat there the entire time, stone-faced, occasionally nodding along with the proceedings. When I'd caught her eye, she'd simply shrugged. "It's just business," she'd whispered, as I gathered what few personal items security allowed me to take. Just business. Right. I took another sip of whiskey from my coffee mug and watched her wrap up the speech. The comments section was already lighting up with congratulations and corporate speak. Nobody seemed to remember that 6 months ago, Lydia couldn't balance a checkbook without calling her accountant. My phone buzzed with a text from Rex, my trainer at Murphy's boxing gym. "Saw the news. You okay?" I typed back, "Monday will be interesting." Because it would be. See, there was something the board didn't know, something even Lydia had forgotten in her rush to claim power. When her father, Edwin, the General Fairchild, had started transferring shares to family members for tax purposes 3 years ago, he'd been very generous with his son-in-law, 71% generous to be exact. The shares were held in a trust, managed quietly by a law firm downtown. Edwin had insisted on it, claiming it would keep the government's hands out of the cookie jar. Lydia knew about the arrangement, but had never bothered to ask about the details. She'd been too busy climbing the corporate ladder to pay attention to the legal paperwork. I finished my whiskey and started the truck. Time to go home and plan my next move. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of Ronan Price's silver BMW in the executive section. Ronan, the company's legal counsel and Lydia's right-hand man. Funny how he'd been working late with her so often lately. My modest condo felt different when I walked in that evening. Smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted while I was getting fired. I loosened my tie and poured another whiskey, this time from the good bottle. If you're going to get stabbed in the back by your wife, you might as well drink something decent while you process it. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Lydia wouldn't be home for hours, if at all. She'd probably be celebrating with the board, toasting their successful coup. I wandered into our bedroom and started going through her things, not really sure what I was looking for. I found it in her purse. A second phone, one I'd never seen before. The screen lit up when I touched it, revealing a string of messages that made my stomach turn. Not because they were shocking. I'd suspected the affair for weeks, but because they were so pathetically cliché. "Can't wait to celebrate tonight," read the most recent message from Ronan. "Your place or mine?" "Mine," Lydia had replied. "Dorian will be licking his wounds somewhere. We'll have privacy." I scrolled through more messages, each one confirming what I'd already known. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way she'd started looking at me like I was furniture she was tired of dusting around. It had all been building to this moment, this corporate coup disguised as a business decision. I set the phone back where I'd found it and walked to my home office. Time to make some calls. The first was to Harold Winters, the lawyer managing the trust. The second was to my old business partner, Jake Morrison, who ran a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. "Dorian," Harold answered on the second ring. "I heard about today. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry yet," I said. "I need you to prepare some paperwork. It's time to exercise those voting rights." "All of them?" Every single share. Harold was quiet for a moment. That's going to cause quite a stir. That's the idea. My next call was to Jake. I need a favor, I told him. How quickly can you set up some shell companies? Depends on what you need them for. Redirecting some contracts. Nothing illegal, just creative business practices. Jake laughed. How creative are we talking? Creative enough to make Monday morning very interesting for some people. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, setting wheels in motion. By the time Lydia came home, stumbling slightly, smelling like expensive champagne and Ronan's cologne, I was sitting in my chair, reading a book like nothing had happened. "You're up late," she said, kicking off her heels. "Couldn't sleep," I replied without looking up. "Funny thing about getting fired, it really gets the mind racing." She paused in the doorway, studying my face. "Dorian, about today." "It's just business," I interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. "Isn't that what you said?" She nodded slowly, like she was trying to gauge my mood. "You're taking this well." "Am I?" I closed the book and stood up. Maybe I'm just tired of being underestimated. Something flickered in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even fear. But it passed quickly, replaced by the cold confidence she'd been wearing like armor lately. "The company will be better off," she said. "You'll see." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "I'm sure it will be. Good night, Lydia." As she headed upstairs, I opened my laptop and started typing emails. The first was to our 3 biggest clients, explaining that their contracts would be transitioning to new management companies that just happened to be owned by a certain recently unemployed COO. The second was to several key suppliers, offering them more favorable terms if they were willing to make some adjustments to their delivery schedules. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. By morning, Fairchild Holdings would be hemorrhaging money, and nobody would understand why. Well, almost nobody. I poured one last whiskey and raised it in a toast to the empty room. "Here's to Monday morning," I said aloud, "and here's to teaching some people that the house always wins, unless you built the house yourself." Monday morning came with all the subtlety of a freight train. I was at Murphy's boxing gym by 6 a.m., working out my frustrations on the heavy bag, while Rex watched from his corner, occasionally shouting encouragement or corrections to my form. "Keep your guard up," he called out as I threw a combination. "And stop thinking so hard. Your face gives away every thought." Rex Chalmers was old-school tough, the kind of guy who'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by much. He'd been running this gym for 20 years, training everyone from weekend warriors to semi-professional fighters. More importantly, he was one of the few people in this city who didn't give a damn about corporate politics or social climbing. "Rough weekend?" he asked as I unwrapped my hands. "You could say that." I grabbed a towel and wiped the sweat from my face. Ever have one of those moments where you realize everyone around you thinks you're an idiot? "Every day of my marriage," Rex grinned. "Difference is, my wife's usually right." I laughed despite myself. Mine thinks she just pulled off the perfect crime. Did she? That remains to be seen. My phone had been buzzing all morning with increasingly frantic calls from the office. I'd ignored them all, but the voicemails were getting more desperate by the hour. The last one, from Margaret Lowell, was particularly entertaining. "Dorian, we need to talk immediately. There seem to be some issues with our client contracts. Call me back as soon as you get this." Issues. That was one way to put it. By my count, Fairchild Holdings had lost about 60% of its revenue stream overnight. The shell companies I'd set up were now handling the contracts, and the clients were happy with their new, more competitive rates. Of course, those rates were only possible because I was operating at a loss, but that was a problem for future Dorian to worry about. I decided to return Margaret's call from the gym, partly because I wanted Rex to hear this conversation, and partly because I knew the background noise would irritate her. "Where are you?" she demanded without preamble. "We need you here now." "I'm not sure I understand," I said, holding the phone away from my ear as someone started up a particularly loud treadmill. "I was fired, remember? It's just business. Don't play games, Dorian. Our clients are jumping ship, and somehow they're all going to the same consulting firms that didn't exist last week." "Huh. That is strange. Maybe you should look into that. We both know what you're doing." "Do we? Because I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. I'm just a recently unemployed executive working out his frustrations at the gym." Rex was grinning now, clearly enjoying the show. He made a gesture for me to put the call on speaker. "This is corporate sabotage," Margaret continued, her voice rising. "We can sue you for this." "Sue me for what exactly? Starting my own business? Last I checked, that was still legal in this country. Besides, I'm not the one who decided I was expendable." There was a long pause. I could practically hear her grinding her teeth. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Want? I don't want anything. I'm perfectly happy with my new career path. In fact, I should probably thank you for the push. Sometimes you don't realize how much potential you have until someone forces you to explore it." I hung up before she could respond. Rex was laughing so hard he had to sit down. "That was beautiful," he said, wiping his eyes. "Absolutely beautiful. But you know they're going to come after you hard now. Let them try." The rest of the morning was spent fielding similar calls from various board members and executives, all of them trying different approaches. Some were angry, some were pleading, and a few tried to sound casual, as if they were just checking in on an old colleague. I treated them all with the same polite indifference, like I was discussing the weather with strangers. Around noon, I decided it was time to make an appearance at the office, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see their faces when they realized how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. The Fairchild Holdings building was a gleaming monument to corporate success, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a middle finger pointed at the working-class neighborhoods below. I'd always found it a bit pretentious, but Edwin had insisted on the design. "Image matters," he'd said. "People need to see that we're serious." The lobby was buzzing with activity, but I noticed several familiar faces missing, probably in emergency meetings trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. I took the elevator to the executive floor, nodding politely to the receptionist who looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Hayes," she stammered. We heard that I was fired?" "Yes, that's true. I'm just here to collect a few things I forgot." Of course, I wasn't here to collect anything. I was here to watch the chaos unfold and maybe have a little fun while I was at it. The executive floor was in full panic mode, with people rushing between offices and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. It reminded me of an anthill after someone had kicked it. I found Lydia in her new corner office, my old corner office actually, staring at her computer screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. She looked up when I knocked on the door frame. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Thought I'd congratulate you on your first day as CEO, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "How's it going so far?" "You know exactly how it's going." "Do I? I've been at the gym all morning. Great workout, by the way. Really helps clear the head after major life changes." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those sharp blue eyes that had first attracted me 10 years ago. Back then, that intensity had been exciting. Now it just looked calculating. "What's your end game here, Dorian?" "End game? I'm just trying to make a living. Turns out I'm pretty good at this consulting thing. Who knew? This isn't sustainable. You're operating at a loss just to hurt us." "Are we talking about business or our marriage? Because honestly, both have been operating at a loss for a while now." That hit home. I saw her flinch slightly before she regained her composure. "If this is about us—" "Us?" I interrupted. There is no us, Lydia. There's you, there's your boyfriend, and there's me. That's not really an us situation. Now she looked genuinely surprised. How did you... Your second phone. Really? That's like cheating 101. I expected better from someone who just orchestrated a corporate coup. She was quiet for a long moment, probably trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I was guessing. The truth was, I knew enough to destroy her, but I was enjoying watching her squirm too much to play all my cards at once. Ronan and I are having an affair. Yes, I'm aware. The whole office probably knows by now. You're not as subtle as you think. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You got bored with your boring husband, found someone more exciting, and decided to upgrade your whole life at once. New job, new man, new future. Very efficient. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the expectations, the constant judgment. Everyone always assumed I only got where I am because of my father. And now they'll assume you got where you are because you slept with the legal counsel. Much better. She spun around, her face flushed with anger. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how you and your boyfriend conspired to have me fired so you could run the company together. Let's talk about how you've been planning this for months while pretending to be my loving wife. Let's talk about fair. Before she could respond, Ronan Price walked into the office without knocking. He was tall, handsome in that polished way that screamed expensive education and family money. His suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. Lydia, we need to... He stopped when he saw me. What's he doing here? Hello, Ronan, I said pleasantly. Congratulations on the promotion. Oh wait, that's right. You didn't get promoted. You just got to sleep with the boss. My mistake. His face went red. You need to leave, now. Actually, I don't think I do. See, this is still partly my company, whether you like it or not. In fact, I'd say I have more right to be here than you do. You were fired, he said, stepping closer to my chair. You have no rights here. I stood up slowly, making sure he could see that I had a few inches and probably 30 pounds on him. All those mornings at the gym were paying off. Careful, Ronan. You wouldn't want to do something that might end up in a lawsuit. Bad for the company image. He backed down, but I could see the anger simmering in his eyes. Good. Angry people make mistakes. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It's really not. In fact, I'd say we're just getting started. The charity gala was Lydia's idea of showing the city that Fairchild Holdings was still a major player, despite the recent restructuring. $500 a plate, black tie required, all proceeds going to some foundation that probably spent more on administrative costs than actual charity work. It was exactly the kind of event I normally avoided, but tonight I had a different agenda. I'd bought my ticket under my own name, curious to see if they'd try to have me removed. They didn't, which told me they were either very confident or very stupid. Based on recent events, I was leaning toward the latter. The ballroom at the Grand Metropolitan was decorated in the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive taste. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, enough flowers to stock a small florist shop. I recognized most of the faces. City council members, business leaders, socialites who collected charity events like some people collected stamps. Lydia was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. She looked stunning in a black evening gown that probably cost more than my truck. Her blonde hair swept up in an elegant style that showed off the diamond earrings I'd given her for our anniversary last year. Ronan was hovering nearby, playing the role of devoted advisor, while his eyes followed her every move. I grabbed a whiskey and found a table near the back, content to watch the show for now. It didn't take long for people to notice me. The whispers started almost immediately, spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. By the time dinner was served, half the room was stealing glances in my direction. Margaret Lowell was the first to approach my table, her face set in what she probably thought was a diplomatic expression. "Dorian," she said, settling into the chair beside me, "I'm surprised to see you here." "Why? I bought a ticket just like everyone else. It's for a good cause, right?" "Of course. I just thought, given recent circumstances—" "You mean getting fired? Why would that stop me from supporting charity? I may be unemployed, but I'm not heartless." She smiled tightly. "How are you adjusting to your new situation?" "Better than expected, actually. Turns out there's life after Fairchild Holdings. Who knew?" "I heard you started your own consulting firm." "News travels fast." "Yes, I did. Business is booming, actually. Seems like there's a real demand for someone who understands how corporate restructuring works." Her smile became even more strained. "I'm sure there is." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, both of us dancing around the real issues while maintaining perfect politeness. It was like watching two people play chess while pretending they were just arranging the pieces randomly. After Margaret excused herself, I was approached by a steady stream of curious guests. Some were genuinely sympathetic, others were clearly fishing for gossip, and a few seemed to be testing the waters to see if I might be useful to them in some way. I treated them all with the same cordial indifference, giving just enough information to keep them interested, but not enough to satisfy their curiosity. The real entertainment began when Lydia took the stage to give a speech about corporate responsibility and community engagement. She was a natural public speaker, confident and articulate, hitting all the right notes about giving back and making a difference. The audience ate it up, applauding at all the appropriate moments. "Fairchild Holdings has always been committed to this community," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "Under new leadership, we're doubling down on that commitment, ensuring that our success translates into real benefits for the people and organizations that make this city great." New leadership. She couldn't resist the dig, even at a charity event. I decided it was time to have some fun. When she finished her speech and returned to her table, I made my way over to where she and Ronan were sitting with several other board members and their spouses. The conversation stopped when I approached. "Wonderful speech, Lydia," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Very inspiring. Though I have to ask, when you talk about new leadership, are you referring to professional qualifications or just sleeping arrangements?" The silence was immediate and total. You could have heard a champagne cork drop. Lydia's face went white, then red, then settled somewhere in between. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice barely controlled. "Oh, I'm sorry. Was that too subtle? I meant to ask whether your promotion was based on your business acumen or your relationship with the legal department." Ronan started to stand up, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Easy there, counselor. We're all friends here, right? Just having a friendly conversation about corporate governance and professional ethics." "You're drunk," Lydia said, though we both knew I'd only had 2 whiskeys all evening. "Am I? Or am I just finally saying what everyone in this room is already thinking?" I looked around at the other guests, who were all staring at our table with the fascination of people watching a car wreck. "I mean, it's not exactly a secret, is it? The late nights, the private meetings, the way you two look at each other during board presentations. It's actually kind of sweet, in a completely unprofessional way." "That's enough," Ronan said, finally finding his voice. "You need to leave." "Do I? This is a public event, and I bought my ticket just like everyone else. Besides, I'm just making conversation. Isn't that what these things are for? Networking, socializing, getting to know your fellow community leaders?" I turned back to Lydia, who was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Speaking of community leadership, how are things going at the office? I heard there were some challenges with client retention this week." "You know exactly what's happening," she said through clenched teeth. "Do I? I've been so busy with my new consulting business, I haven't had time to keep up with industry news." But I did hear something about contracts being transferred to more competitive firms. Market forces, I suppose. Very unfortunate. The conversation at nearby tables had stopped completely. Everyone was listening now, sensing drama, but not quite understanding the full scope of what they were witnessing. "You're destroying the company out of spite," Lydia said, abandoning any pretense of politeness. "Am I? Or am I just providing better service at more competitive rates? Isn't that how capitalism is supposed to work? This is about our marriage, not business." "Our marriage?" I laughed, making sure it carried to the surrounding tables. "What marriage? You mean the arrangement where I work 60-hour weeks to build a company while you plan your exit strategy with the legal counsel? That marriage?" Now people were starting to murmur, putting together the pieces of what they were hearing. I could see phones coming out, probably to text friends and family about the drama unfolding at the charity gala. Lydia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not doing this here." "Where would you prefer to do it? Your office? Oh wait, that used to be my office. Your penthouse? Oh wait, I helped pay for that. Ronan's place? That might be more appropriate, actually." She threw her wine in my face. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps, exclamations, the sound of chairs being pushed back as people stood to get a better view. I stood there for a moment, red wine dripping from my face onto my tuxedo, and then I started laughing. "Well," I said, wiping wine from my eyes with my napkin, "I guess that answers that question." The applause started from somewhere in the back of the room and spread through the crowd like wildfire. Not everyone was clapping. Some people looked shocked, others embarrassed, but enough people were enjoying the show that it felt like a standing ovation. I took a small bow, still chuckling, and then looked directly at Lydia. "Thank you for the drink, and thank you for finally showing everyone exactly who you really are." I walked out of the ballroom to continued applause, leaving behind a room full of people who would be talking about this evening for months. As I reached the lobby, my phone was already buzzing with text messages and missed calls. By morning, the story would be all over the city's social media, probably with video footage and commentary. Phase 2 of my plan was now complete. Lydia's reputation was in tatters, her professional credibility was shot, and everyone who mattered in this city now knew exactly what kind of person she was. More importantly, they knew I wasn't going to go quietly into the night. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool night air dry the wine from my face. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had been perfect. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it's a glass of wine served publicly, in front of everyone who needs to see the truth. The annual shareholders' meeting was supposed to be a formality, one of those corporate rituals that existed mainly to satisfy legal requirements. 90 minutes of financial reports, board presentations, and polite questions from investors who already knew all the answers. This year was going to be different. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row of the packed auditorium. The room was buzzing with energy that felt different from previous years. There was tension in the air, expectation. Word of the charity gala incident had spread through the business community like wildfire, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Lydia was on the stage with the rest of the board, looking composed and professional in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd done a good job of damage control over the past 2 weeks, giving interviews about personal attacks and professional sabotage, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive ex-husband who couldn't handle being replaced. The narrative might have worked if I hadn't spent those same 2 weeks systematically dismantling everything she'd tried to build. 3 more major clients had jumped ship, 2 key suppliers had renegotiated their contracts with terms that heavily favored my consulting firm, and the company's stock price had dropped 15%. The financial press was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Fairchild Holdings' future viability. Margaret Lowell called the meeting to order with the kind of forced cheerfulness that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. The first hour proceeded according to script, Financial reports that painted an optimistic picture while carefully avoiding recent losses, presentations about future growth opportunities that everyone knew were pipe dreams, and softball questions from friendly investors. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. "Before we conclude today's meeting," Margaret announced, "we'll open the floor for questions from shareholders." I stood up slowly, making sure everyone could see me. The murmur that ran through the crowd was immediate and electric. "I have a question," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. Margaret's face went pale. "Mr. Hayes, we weren't expecting—" "I'm a shareholder," I said pleasantly. "Don't I have the right to ask questions about my investment?" She looked to the corporate lawyers sitting at the side of the stage, but they could only shrug. Legally, she had to recognize me. "Of course," she said, her voice tight. "What's your question?" I walked slowly down the aisle toward the front of the room, making sure everyone could see and hear me clearly. My question is about corporate governance and leadership accountability. Specifically, I'm curious about the process by which the current CEO was selected. "The board followed all proper procedures," Margaret replied quickly. "Ms. Fairchild was chosen based on her qualifications and experience." "Interesting. And what role did her personal relationship with legal counsel Ronan Price play in that selection process?" The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of people shifting in their seats to get a better view. On the stage, Lydia had gone rigid, while Ronan looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "I don't understand the question," Margaret said, though her expression suggested she understood perfectly. "Let me be more specific." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "I have here a series of text messages between the CEO and Mr. Price, dating back several months before my termination. Would the shareholders like to hear some excerpts?" "You can't," Ronan started to say, but I cut him off. "Actually, I can. These messages were obtained legally, and they're quite relevant to the question of corporate governance." I started reading from the phone, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent auditorium. "Once we get Dorian out of the picture, we can run things the way they should be run." That's from Ms. Fairchild to Mr. Price, dated 3 weeks before the board meeting where I was terminated. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Shareholders started shouting questions, reporters in the press section began frantically taking notes, and several board members looked like they wanted to flee the stage. "Here's another good one," I continued. "Make sure Margaret understands that voting against us would be bad for her consulting contracts." That's Mr. Price to Ms. Fairchild, discussing how to ensure board loyalty. Margaret was on her feet now, pounding her gavel and calling for order, but the crowd was beyond control. I kept reading, each message more damaging than the last, painting a clear picture of conspiracy, manipulation, and abuse of power. "And my personal favorite," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the chaos. "Dorian never appreciated what he had. When this is over, we'll show him what real power looks like." That's when Ronan snapped. He jumped up from his chair and started toward the edge of the stage, his face red with rage. "You son of a—" He never finished the sentence. Security was already moving toward him, but I held up my hand to stop them. "It's okay," I called out. "Let him come down here. I think Mr. Price has something he'd like to say." Ronan stormed down from the stage, pushing through the crowd until he was standing directly in front of me. For a moment I thought he might actually try to hit me, but he seemed to remember where we were. "You're finished," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "We'll sue you for everything you have." "For what? Reading text messages at a shareholders' meeting? I'm pretty sure that falls under free speech." I looked past him to Lydia, who was still frozen on the stage. "Besides, I'm not the one who's finished here." I turned back to address the crowd, which had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here today as a disgruntled ex-employee or a bitter ex-husband. I'm here as a shareholder who's concerned about the direction of this company. I paused, letting that sink in. In fact, I'm here as the majority shareholder of Fairchild Holdings, with 71% of the voting shares held in trust. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that auditorium. On the stage, Margaret looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Lydia's mouth was hanging open, and several board members were frantically whispering to each other. "That's impossible," Margaret finally managed to say. "Is it?" I pulled out a folder and held it up. "I have the documentation right here, signed, notarized, and filed with the appropriate regulatory agencies. Edwin Fairchild transferred these shares to me 3 years ago as part of his estate planning. The board was notified at the time, though apparently some people didn't bother to read the fine print." I walked closer to the stage, making sure everyone could see the documents. Which means that every decision made by this board over the past month, including my termination, was made without the consent of the majority shareholder. That makes them legally invalid. The crowd erupted again, but this time it was different. Shareholders were demanding answers, reporters were shouting questions, and the board members were looking at each other with panic in their eyes. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Effective immediately, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current leadership. All those in favor?" The response was overwhelming. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium, voices called out in support, and the few dissenting votes were drowned out by the majority. "Motion carried," I announced with a smile. "Ms. Fairchild, Mr. Price, you're terminated. Security will escort you from the building." Lydia finally found her voice. "You can't do this," she said, her composure finally cracking. "This company is my inheritance, my birthright." "Actually," I replied, "it's my company now, and I can do whatever I want with it." As security moved to escort Lydia and Ronan from the stage, I turned back to address the shareholders one final time. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll be announcing new leadership within the week, along with a comprehensive plan to restore the company's financial stability and reputation. Those contracts that were transferred to my consulting firm, they'll be coming back, along with several new ones I've been negotiating." The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that went on for several minutes. As I walked out of the auditorium, I could hear Lydia shouting something behind me, but her words were lost in the noise of the crowd. Outside in the lobby, reporters were already setting up for impromptu interviews, and my phone was buzzing with calls from business associates and potential partners. The story would be front-page news by tomorrow, the kind of corporate drama that people would be talking about for years. But the best part wasn't the public vindication or the business victory. The best part was the look on Lydia's face when she realized that she'd never really understood who she was married to. And by the time she figured it out, it was far too late to matter. The storm hit the city like a declaration of war, turning the evening sky black and sending sheets of rain against the windows of my condo. I was sitting in my living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand, watching the lightning illuminate the skyline when she knocked on my door. I knew it was Lydia before I opened it. Who else would be desperate enough to come here, tonight, after everything that had happened? She stood in the hallway, soaked to the skin, her expensive clothes clinging to her body and her carefully styled hair hanging in wet strands around her face. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "Do we?" I closed the door and leaned against it, studying her. Even disheveled and desperate, she was still beautiful. That had always been her weapon of choice, the thing she relied on when everything else failed. "You can't just destroy everything we built together," she said, turning to face me. "This is insane, Dorian. You're acting like a crazy person." "Am I? Or am I just finally acting like someone who knows his own worth?" She started pacing around the living room, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor. "Look, I know you're angry about the affair. I know you feel betrayed. But this has gone too far." "Has it? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like it's just getting started." She stopped pacing and looked at me with those blue eyes that used to make me forget my own name. "What do you want? Money? I can give you money. A settlement, alimony, whatever you need to start over somewhere else. I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet apartment. You think this is about money? Then what? Revenge? You've had your revenge. You humiliated me in public, destroyed my career, took away everything I worked for. Isn't that enough? Everything you worked for? I set down my whiskey and walked closer to her. You mean everything we worked for? Everything I helped you build while you were planning to stab me in the back? It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she said, and for the first time, her voice cracked slightly. Ronan and I, it happened. I didn't plan it. Maybe not the affair, but you planned everything else. The corporate coup, my termination, your rise to power. That was all very carefully orchestrated. She was quiet for a moment, water still dripping from her clothes onto the floor. Outside, the thunder was getting closer, the lightning more frequent. I felt trapped, she finally said. Trapped in this marriage, trapped in your shadow, trapped in a life where everyone assumed I was just the boss's daughter who married her father's employee. I needed to prove that I was more than that. So you proved it, by sleeping with the lawyer and conspiring to fire your husband. Very impressive. Don't be cruel, Dorian. Not now. Cruel? You want to see cruel? I walked to the window, looking out at the storm. Cruel would have been doing this quietly, behind closed doors, through lawyers and accountants. Cruel would have been taking everything you cared about and grinding it into dust without giving you a chance to fight back. I turned to face her again. What I did was give you exactly what you gave me, a public betrayal, a professional humiliation, and the chance to watch everything you thought you controlled slip through your fingers. She started crying then, not the elegant tears of a woman trying to manipulate a man, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who had finally realized how completely she had lost. I felt nothing watching her break down. Not satisfaction, not pity, not even the ghost of the love I'd once felt for her. Please, she said between sobs, there has to be something we can work out. Some way to fix this. Before I could answer, there was another knock at the door. This one was more urgent, more desperate. I opened it to find Ronan standing in the hallway, as soaked as Lydia had been, his expensive suit ruined by the rain. Is she here? He demanded, pushing past me just as Lydia had done. Well, well, I said, closing the door behind him. The gang's all here. Should I make coffee? Ronan ignored me, going straight to Lydia and pulling her into his arms. Are you okay? I've been looking everywhere for you. How touching, I said. True love conquers all, even corporate sabotage and public humiliation. This is your fault, Ronan said, turning to face me while keeping one arm around Lydia. All of it. If you'd just accepted what happened and moved on like a normal person, none of this would have been necessary. Moved on? Like a normal person? I walked closer to them, noting how Ronan instinctively stepped back. You mean like someone who just accepts being cheated on and fired and humiliated? Sorry, but I'm not that kind of normal. You're sick, he said. Obsessed. This whole thing is just the tantrum of a man who can't accept that his wife doesn't love him anymore. You're right about one thing, I said. She doesn't love me anymore. But then again, I don't think she ever really did. Love requires respect, and you can't respect someone you're constantly underestimating. I looked at both of them, these two people who had thought they were so clever, so sophisticated, so much smarter than the blue-collar kid who'd married above his station. You want to know the funny thing? I would have given you anything you asked for, Lydia. A divorce, a settlement, even control of the company if you'd just been honest about what you wanted. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to make it personal. You had to make me the villain in your story. You are the villain, Ronan said. Look what you've done to her, to the company, to everyone who worked there. What I've done? I gave everyone exactly what they deserved. You wanted power without responsibility, success without sacrifice, respect without earning it. How's that working out for you? The lights flickered as another bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby. In the brief darkness, I could see their faces clearly, scared, desperate, finally understanding that they had never been in control of this situation. Here's what's going to happen, I said when the lights came back on. You're both going to leave. Tonight. You're going to pack whatever you can carry and get out of this city because there's nothing left for you here. You can't make us leave, Lydia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Let's see. Your reputation is destroyed, your career is over, and thanks to some very creative accounting, your personal assets are tied up in litigation that could take years to resolve. Ronan's in even worse shape, disbarred, unemployable, and according to my sources, about 50,000 in debt to some very unforgiving people. Ronan's face went white. How did you know about your gambling problem? Please, I've known about that for months. Why do you think it was so easy to turn the board against you? They don't like executives with compromising personal habits. I walked to the door and opened it, letting in the sound of the storm. So here's your choice. Leave quietly, start over somewhere else, and maybe eventually rebuild some kind of life for yourselves. Or stay here and watch me systematically destroy whatever's left of your reputations, your finances, and your future prospects. They looked at each other, then back at me, and I could see the exact moment when they realized they had no options left. This isn't over, Lydia said as they walked toward the door. Yes, I replied. It really is. I watched them walk down the hallway together, two people who had thought they were predators, discovering they were actually prey. The elevator doors closed behind them, and I was alone again with the storm and my whiskey and the satisfaction of a job well done. Outside, the rain was already starting to slow, and the thunder was moving away toward the horizon. By morning, the storm would be over, the city would be clean, and I would begin the work of rebuilding everything they had tried to destroy. I raised my glass to the empty room and smiled. Monday was interesting, I said aloud. But Friday? That's when the real fun started.